Hello, everyone. We'll be reading the reading the re-entry journal number 5, Rigoberta Menchu, an interview with her by Juan Jesus Aznarez, Those Who Attack Me Humiliate the Victims. So this again is in the same PDF, and let's begin reading. This was written published in a paper called El País in Madrid on Sunday, January 24th in 1999. Only a few weeks ago, a scandal broke out that affects the image of the 1992 Nobel Peace Prize winner, anthropologist David Stoll, and a report in the New York Times using Stoll's book as a script, so the first thing we read, inputted to the book I, Rigoberta Menchu, written in 1984, Exaggerations, Inventions, or Falsehoods. Stoll, in November, the Times reporter Larry Ruchter, on December 15th, affirmed that Menchu's text is not a testimonial text as it pretends to be, and that its recounting of events does not correspond to the reality. The disputed episodes took place during the 36 years of internal war in Guatemala. Those final numbers are horrific. 100,000 people dead, whose final numbers are horrific. 100,000 people dead, 40,000 disappeared, 200,000 orphans, and a wandering legion of 100,000 widows. According to anthropologist Dave Stoll and the Times, the territorial dispute that the Nobel Prize winner attributes to the battle against landowners with Spanish surnames, one of the foundations of her book, was in reality a family battle between her father and some relatives. There was no younger brother who died of malnutrition because Nicolas Thum, Rigoberta's brother, is alive and well in San Miguel Uspantan, and it does not seem certain that another of her brothers, Petrocinio, was really burned alive by soldiers while family members were forced to watch. What is more, they write, it is not true that the Nobel Prize winner scarcely attended school or that she barely knew how to read because she studied in the parochial school run by Belgian nuns of the Order of the Holy Family. She is accused as well of representing other people's experiences as her own. She tried to be all things to all people, the authors conclude. The Rigoberta Menchu Foundation reacted Wednesday afternoon, underscoring that none of the imputations attributed to the Nobel Prize winner by the author of Rigoberta Menchu and the Story of All Poor Guatemalans, Stoll, has merit, nor does it weaken a testimony that has the bias and the courage of a victim who, in addition to what she personally suffered, had a right to assume as her own personal history the atrocities that her people lived through. She defends the right to her own historical memory, to narrate the events in function of what she herself lived or what they told her and her own perception of them. Should I beg forgiveness because they killed my father? Should I beg forgiveness because they killed my brother? Or should I beg forgiveness because they massacred the entire village where I lived? I, Rigoberta Menchu, was a testimonial, not an autobiography, she clarifies. I have my truth of what I lived for 20 years. The history of the community is my own history. Is it true that your book omits events and invents or exaggerates others? I recognize, because I do not say in the book, that I was a servant in the Belgian school. I did not say so then in order to protect my relationship with the sisters in those years. How I would have loved to tell all the experiences I had, not only with the Sisters of the Holy Family of the Belgian convent, but in my pastoral work, my work as a catechist with religious communities. Were you a student of that school? They forgot to ask what I did there. I was a servant. I earned 12 quetzals a month, $20 at the time, working in the school. We paid 1 quetzal on Social Security, so I received 11 quetzals in cash. What is another part of my life that I did not include in my book, because the last thing I would have wanted during those years was to associate the Belgian school with me, because one program of the sisters took the young ladies, the students, who were of course from well-to-do families, to do some work in the countryside, which meant that they lived in a rural community for 2 or 3 days, met the people there, got the sense of being in a small village on the outskirts of the capital, and thereby completed their education. Many of those young ladies have died. The nuns had other convents that were completely destroyed during the war. Why would I want to associate the Belgian school with me publicly? As I said, I was subversive, communist, and so on. If I had stayed in Guatemala, I would have been killed too. Did you take classes there? We had 2 classes per week, 3 hours per day after 3 p.m. We didn't study with the rest of the students. We had our own teacher who taught us reading and writing, then sewing and cooking on Saturdays and Sundays. They called it home economics. Our duty was to clean before class and afterwards, to clean until 11 p.m. You didn't participate in the normal course of study? No. What I would have given to have that grand opportunity. Later, I won a scholarship for an adult education program. How did your brother Petrocinio die? For many years, I couldn't even say that my mother told the truth about my brother Petrocinio, and I admitted to myself because I never wanted my mother to be in anyone else's mouth. We should let the dead rest in peace. What most offends me is that they say, well, Rigoberta's brother wasn't burned alive, he went to a common grave. That is true of so many victims of Guatemala, where the uncertainty is demonstrated by the existence of common graves. Did you see his murder? My mother saw it, and she could no longer speak about it. And how could I possibly have presented my mother as the number one witness when they have killed so many witnesses so they can't speak? That was a common practice in Guatemala. That account is one truth, my mother's truth. And if you ask me, I believe Stoll or my mother, it is obvious that I believe my mother. Your mother told you how Patrocinio died. Of course, she went to look at all the faces of the cadavers that were produced in the region, still trying to doubt it, that her boy had died. She didn't want to believe it, and she had to go see each dead body in case there was the slightest hope that it hadn't been him. I can say that if my brother was not a boy, and if it was just a fantasy or of a crazy mother looking for her son in every tomb, that it was my mother's fantasy. Let them show me the common grave where my brother is buried. If someone hands over his corpse to me, I will change my mind. My truth is that Petrocinio was burned alive. Territorial dispute. And the territorial disputes, were they against landowners or were they a family quarrel? This is a 50-year-old problem. We have recovered my father's records from 1952 in order to gain lawful rights to those lands. All his life, my father struggled there. It is said that my grandfather, Nicolas Tum, who died in 1980, long before the problems began, supposedly sold the land to another Ladino who lives in another village. And in 1996, we had to negotiate with that Ladino so he would sell us back the land where my father made his life, where I was born, where I grew up. I bought back this land that was my father's. My grandfather never would have sold those lands, and he, Stoll, reduces it all to a simple family dispute. Everyone knows that the issue of land was one of the most debated issues of the peace accord. Why? Because it had an extremely high budget, much higher than any other issues of the peace accords. First, because they had to do a census of the lands. The World Bank had to promise $1 million contribution. The land only has the heritage of conflict. There are always many owners, and the wiliest becomes the owner of the land. There was a need for a political negotiation between all the parties concerned. In this process, entire communities, big landowners, woodcutters, and other businesses are involved. There is a lot of speculation. They say that your brother Nicolas did not die. I want to be very frank with you. I have a brother, Nicolas the first, the one who died, and another, Nicolas II, who is still alive. That is very normal in Guatemala, that names are repeated in families. And in yours? He, Stoll, is supposedly an anthropologist who studied the indigenous worldview, and that the repetition of names is commonplace in the so-called Maya world and in all indigenous communities in Latin America. The repetition is a theme that has been much discussed. The repetition of names she's talking about here is a theme that has been much discussed in the classification of the reports done by the REMHI, acronym for the Recovery of Historical Memory, where names are also repeated. An investigator has to understand that logic and say that in any given family, there are 3 or 4 members with the same name. In my family, there were only 2, not 3 or 4. I have 2 brothers named Nicolas. If both were alive, we would have to talk about Big Nicolas and Little Nicolas. Big Nicolas died. The other one, the older one, Big Nicolas died. The older one, my mother's first son. Is it true that he died of malnutrition? Yes, exactly. The incoherence in this is that in the book, it seems that they are talking about little Nicolas, my younger brother. It was so easy to erase with the stroke of a pen the history of 2 Indians, her brothers, who, if they had been alive, would have been indignant to be used that way, when they have nothing to do with my own convictions, nor with my struggle, nor with the decisions that I make because I am an adult. They criticize you for representing others' experiences as your own. I can't force them to understand. Everything for me that was the story of my community is also my own story. I did not come from the air. I am not a little bird who came alone from the mountains, from parents who were isolated from the world. I am the product of a community, and not only the Guatemalan community. And in response to whether my brothers, my father, were rich, go to Chimel and you will see for yourself that there is no electricity that this year could see the opening of its first school. There are those who are asking that they take away your Nobel Prize. They are confusing things. The Nobel Peace Prize is not the Nobel Prize for literature. That one they give to someone who writes books. They did not give it to me for a single book. The Peace Prize is a symbolic prize given for the role one played in the peace process. Venezuelan anthropologist Elizabeth Burgos, co-author of your book, is hurt that you covered up the atrocities committed by the guerrillas. First, you have to imagine yourself in Guatemala in the mid 1980s. Anyone who even seemed to be part of the opposition, not even the guerrilla movement, would certainly be persecuted immediately. It has been a dreadful story. There were no spaces, there were no intermediaries. I have never said this before, but I am going to say it to you. The truth is that simply belonging to the CUC, the Committee for Peasant Unity, was interpreted as if one were part of the Guatemalan guerrilla. And there were links to the guerrilla movement. Many exiles had links to the guerrilla. The current Guatemalan Vice Minister of External Affairs, Gabriel Aguilera Peralta, Vice Minister of External Affairs, 96 and 98, was the delegate that I met from the Guatemalan Workers' Party, which was the Communist Party, the best known of them. They introduced the chancellor to me as an expert on the close relationship between the insurgent movement in Guatemala and Central America. And I could go on. I met the private secretary of President Arzu when he was high commander in the guerrilla. There is no hidden agenda. Some people think that I have a hidden agenda, hidden truth, and that therefore they must bring out the truth. Today, I can tell you these things because nobody will be assassinated tomorrow because of it. Some people affirm that Rigoberta lies. Not even Mr. Stoll's book says I am a liar. What a coincidence that they should say that now, that Rigoberta lies just like that. In that case, the 25,000 witnesses that Monsignor Girardi interviewed before his death also lied because they affirm and reaffirm and super reaffirm the same thing and more that I said in my testimonial, a Rigoberta Menchu. Juan Girardi, the assistant bishop of Guatemala, was assassinated on April 26, 1998, 2 days after presenting the report, Guatemala Never Again. What a coincidence that they say Rigoberta lies when the Commission for Historical Clarification has gone to all the communities and has found not only this truth, but has been able to find all kinds of other crimes against humanity. But still questions your biography. He doesn't deny the atrocities that took place in Guatemala. Of course, all his victims lie. He's already reached a conclusion ahead of time, and he adorns everything to reach that particular conclusion. And the most apparent of all is that not only are we all ignorant, as Mr. Stoll says, so that both communism and liberation theology were able to manipulate our minds, and they created us and made us myths. Of me in particular, they made a barbarous myth, a mysterious phantasm, but he is also saying that we are liars, not just ignorant and savage. That is something that I will not accept for anything in the world. Stoll, the CIA, and the New York Times. Would you be willing to confront him face to face? My problem is not with an individual or two. It is not a lie that I'm anxiously awaiting a photograph to form for myself a picture of how a rival looks that I do not know. I am not rancorous. The day I took the picture with the Guatemalan armed forces and with their commanders, I knew it was a message sent to the rest of the world because they were no less than the perpetrators of the murder of my people, my village, my family. And the day I planted a tree together with the Minister of Defense and the guerrilla commander, I felt that though our lives passed a categorical message, my reasons and my just cause amplify, and my cause amplified justify that. Sorry, my reasons and my cause amply justify that. The reasons for her doing it justify this bit. What do you know about David Stoll's work? It is the first book that holds truly apparent these theses about Guatemala. He claims that the internal armed conflict never existed as such, that it was an exaggerated creation of the communists, and they succeeded in convincing a lot of people. He says that Efrain Rismont, a general dictator rule of Guatemala during 82 to 83, was never responsible for any massacres, but was actually someone who was outside of power without any control over security forces or over repression. He tries to beautify the story of Rismont. Has all this scandal hurt you much? Yes, very much, because it humiliates the victims. It wasn't enough to kill them, to leave them dead. It wasn't enough that my mother was killed, my father, my brothers, but they even want to build a polemic around the dead. Do you think someone is trying to get something by hurting you? I hate to speculate unless I have evidence. We are not going to say it was the CIA, but we cannot believe that someone wasn't behind this either. What interest did the New York Times have in manipulating your story? Larry Rochter is considered a professional with years of experience in Central America. It is too early to reach a conclusion. I have no elements. We are trying to work over the various points of view of our own friends in the United States. I only know that it was an article by the New York Times. That's what I know. I have no elements. What hurts so much is that the article does not even include the nuances of Mr. Stoll's own book. It is something very strange for me. Do you have ways to prove the truth of your own narrative? Read the report on the recovery of historical memory, which gathered the truth about 25,000 victims in Guatemala. It is also enough to go to Guatemala and stand in the agro-exporting finca plantation to see just how many children work in them cutting cane. There are horrible realities that do not belong to the past. It is not a question of you believing in my own truth or someone else's. I'm simply saying that I have a right to my memory, as do my people. The voices of indigenous peoples in Latin America. Rigoberta Menchu, 40 years old, is a Quiche Mayan, one of the 23 indigenous groups that constitute 60% of the Guatemalan population. Since 1981, she has been denouncing the oppression suffered by the indigenous peoples and the internal situation in her country, which suffered the longest and bloodiest conflict in Central America. The signing of the peace accords on December 29, 1996, opened a new process in the nation exploited for many decades by the arbitrariness of right-wing military dictatorships, expecting the democratic periods of President Juan José Arevalo and Jacobo Arbenz, the latter overthrown in 1954 in a coup supported by the CIA. Rigoberta Menchu was the sixth of 9 children of Vicente Menchu, a communal leader, and Juana Tum, a midwife and healer. Her family worked on coffee plantations. Her father died during the occupation of the Spanish embassy in Guatemala on January 31st, 1980. Rigoberta Menchu fled to Mexico, where she spent 12 years and where she met Bishop Samuel Ruiz of the Diocese of San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas. On a trip to Paris, she narrated the story of her life, Rigoberta Menchu, published in Spanish 16 years ago, then in English, and translated afterwards into other languages. And we know from the article the first one was French. After her return to Guatemala in 1988, she was detained at the airport and later freed, thanks to international pressure. 4 years later, her name became known globally when she was granted the Nobel Peace Prize. For 2 decades, she has been the principal figure leading indigenous struggles in Latin America. She has participated in many international forums of their defense, and her biography, now embroiled in controversy, contributed to attracting the world's attention to the bestial behavior taking place in a small Central American country. Guatemala's history is impossible to change one way or the other, she claims, because the crimes committed have sealed the memories of our people. There are thousands and thousands of disappearances, tortures, assassinations, people burned alive. Her primary objective is the promotion of indigenous peoples. Translated by Jill Robbins. All right, so now that we finished reading that, go ahead and finish doing your entry for reading and theory, and that's the homework. These bits. So these are about the articles themselves, and then take a moment to sort of go over everything, I would say, and then do this bit. And this bit, remember, is a response. So it's not just answering the question, it is you're thinking of the situation, and then you're responding sort of in the way that we do the free writes. But first, these questions. All right, that's all for today. Thank you.